Well, hello. I am recording this for those of you who missed the first day of class and the introductory lecture I gave that day. So this will be a somewhat abbreviated version of that. The story of Christianity in that part of North America that becomes the United States begins, of course, with those European adventurers, explorers, and colonists who came to these shores beginning in 1492, which you will recognize, of course, as the year that Columbus stumbled onto these shores. Most of the folks who came to colonize this part of the world were believing and practicing Christians. For many, maybe a majority, Christian faith was one of the motivating factors that brought them here. Some came to spread the gospel, to evangelize the native populations, or more likely to spread the Christian domain of the monarchs to which they were loyal. Some came to find a place to be able to freely embody the version of Christianity that they thought appropriate. And for many, if not most, Christianity, Christian faith was a part of what inspired hope in them in the midst of what had to be an extremely difficult situation, sailing across the Atlantic Ocean and then trying to establish communities here in. Now, I want to be clear in saying that faith was a motivating factor for many, if not most, of the colonists and explorers who came here. That is in no way to deny that there were other strictly secular motives for coming. I mean, in particular, you should know that the Jamestown colony, for example, was established by a stockholding company, the Virginia Company, who saw this as a business investment. And many of the individual people who came to escape unfortunate personal situations in Europe. My own family were German immigrants from a mining region in Germany, and a pastor who has written about all these folks leaving Germany to come to America said that they came to better their crust of bread. That is to say, they came simply for a more economically feasible, sustainable way of life. You need to be aware of what might be called the fragmented religious situation in Europe at the time that North America was being colonized. Kester's, in her little book, refers to two overlapping dramas happening at once, the Protestant Reformation and European expansion or exploration and colonialization. These two dramas were happening simultaneously. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. It was 30 years later that Martin Luther tacked his 95 Theses on a door of a church in Germany, beginning the Protestant Reformation there. Not long thereafter, John Calvin began his version of Protestant Reformation in France, and then being run out of France in Geneva, Switzerland. The point of all this is that where there had once been a singular unified Christian Roman Catholic community in Europe, at the time the exploration was occurring and colonialization was occurring, the situation had become fragmented between Protestants, Catholics, and even certain Anabaptists who were in large measure out of step with both Catholics and Protestants. Kesters says that among the ideas that the colonists brought to the United States was territorialism, which she calls a strategy for dealing with religious difference set loose by this Protestant Reformation. That is to say, the colonists tended to assume that establishing or spreading one's particular version of Christian faith involved not just winning individual allegiance to Christianity and to the version of Christianity one adhered to, but claiming territory and gaining control over it for that version of the faith. They tended to assume, and here's the Latin phrase, whether my pronunciation is right or not, I'm not sure. They tended to assume cuis regio eius religion. That is to say, who's the region, his the religion. So that's to say, if a particular monarch had control over some territory, or you colonized in the name of some monarch, that monarch's religion was thought to be the religion of that territory. It's important to understand that this territorialism assumed some kind of a unity between church and state, or at least a coherence between church and state. It assumes what we will learn to call the establishment of some particular religion, some particular version of Christianity, as the official religion for that territory. That was agreed upon largely by most Catholics and Protestants, even as they disagreed about which religion they were claiming territory for. Now, of course, the first Christians in North America were Roman Catholic. Recall that Columbus's discovery of America precedes the Protestant Reformation. So he is a Roman Catholic, exploring on behalf of the Spanish king or the Spanish monarchy, which is Roman Catholic. And it's clear that Columbus had very distinct religious motivations. He brought a priest along with him on his second journey, precisely because he wanted to see that the native populations were confronted, were converted to Christianity. It's interesting that he set sail 1492 in the same year that the Spanish monarchy had reconquered, it's called the Reconquista, the Iberian Peninsula, what is now Spain and Portugal. They had reconquered it from the Moorish peoples of North Africa that had dominated that peninsula for several centuries. And they were Muslims. And so one might see Columbus's mentality as somewhat as an extension of this crusading mentality that drives out false religion and establishes true ones. Columbus saw his expedition as a means of spreading, in other words, Christian territorial claims. And he also wanted the profits from his expedition to aid in the recovery of Jerusalem by Christians from Muslims. And he saw his work as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. I have made a PDF file available for you under Files on the course website. It's a few pages from a book called The Religious History of America by Galstead and Schmidt, and I would like for you to read those couple of pages about Columbus. Of course, the indigenous Spanish encounter in parts of North America and Central and South America was a disaster for the indigenous populations. And that disaster was mostly a result of their not being able to withstand European diseases. Millions died from those diseases. Of course, it was a disaster because of the violence that was directed against them and the conquering of their control, of their authorities' control over civilizations in North America. Spanish influence, of course, was strongest in Central and South America, but it's left its mark even in those parts of the world that became the United States. Again, Galstead and Schmidt, who I referred to previously in relation to Columbus, wrote this: Spain's presence in North America never equaled so firmly fixed in Central and South America, but the Hispanic presence north of the Rio Grande was strong and enduring. The Catholic missions of the 16th through 18th centuries laid the foundations for a vigorous Hispanic Catholic culture in the United States into the 20th and 21st centuries. It also remapped the landscape in Catholic terms, with names of saints marking settlements from St. Augustine, Florida, to San Francisco, California. So, yeah, you should be aware, as I'm sure you already are, that in many parts of the United States, the Southwest in particular, West Coast, to some degree Florida, we still see the remnants of that Hispanic Catholic early influence. I'm largely skipping the story of French Catholic influence in the Great Lakes region, but you should be aware that French Catholic explorers and missionaries had a great impact in the region around the Great Lakes. More significant to the story of Christianity in the United States is the Catholic presence in Maryland. Maryland was colonized in 1634 through a royal grant to an English Catholic family, the Calverts. The Calverts wanted a safe haven for English Catholics, and we're going to go back and talk about the turmoil in England, which saw persecution of Catholics and Protestants depending on the religion of the king who happened to be in control. But the Calverts wanted a safe haven for English Catholics when it became clear that England was going to be Protestant. And of course, they wanted to increase the family fortune. So Catholics first came to Maryland, but interestingly, very soon they were a minority even there. Now, what's noteworthy is that the Calverts in Maryland established something called the Maryland Toleration Act, which is something of the first example of legal religious toleration in the American colonies. Now, it was toleration only between and among Christians, and it simply recognized the reality that Maryland was becoming predominantly Protestant, but this law recognized toleration, prohibited persecution of that Catholic minority. Catholics remained a minority, a small minority in the United States, really until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when significant Irish and Italian immigration made Roman Catholics a significant and large, but still minority. Okay, that concludes our introduction. Looking at the early Roman Catholic presence. Next, we'll turn to the English presence in North America.